So, for many of you listening to this conversation on the Neil Wilkins podcast, when I mention the letters A and I, you'll be thinking ChatGPT, you'll be thinking a whole host of probably content production ideas, maybe a little bit of automation, maybe AI agents and chatbots. But my guest on this episode is Michael Vandi. Now, Michael is the CEO of Addy, and we are going to go into what Addy is and the incredible work that Michael is doing, helping banks and non-bank lenders close billions of dollars in mortgage loans, but get this, 90% faster. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Neil. Happy to be here.
90% faster. Now, this is not just an evolution, is it, of the industry? This is a revolution.
Yeah. It's a complete rethinking of how banks, mortgage banks, we call them lenders, how they close loans.
Yeah, and when we talk about 90%, I mean, we're not just talking about, okay, a little bit of tuning here, a little bit of a process improvement there. This, as you say, is a complete rethink. And I think a lot of people in a whole variety of sectors, but whether it's professional services, financial services, or product-related sectors, are probably thinking of, the power of AI and the power of kind of rethinking your industry or your business as actually something that's almost like way beyond. But this was your starting game. This is kind of you entering into this industry off the back of an absolute revolution. Where do you kind of begin with something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've never bought a house. I've never had a mortgage. And I don't have prior experience working in the mortgage lending industry. But what I have is a lot of experience with AI and a lot of experience with writing code. I've been writing code since I was 14. And then I've been getting into AI since I was 14. And then I studied computer science and took some AI classes as well. And I came into the industry with a rather new thinking of how lending and mortgage loans could be revolutionized with AI. And I did not come to it with a completely new thinking, but what we started with is we started with training AI models just for developers, financial services developers, all kinds of developers. So we built a library to train AI models. And a mortgage bank reached out and was like, can you train an AI model to help our loan officers close loans faster? And one of their problems was a way to extract loan opportunities from forms that get filled on their websites, that go to their emails, documents that are submitted, extract all of that data, and then sync it with their CRM. So we built a model that did that for them with over 99% accuracy. And that was a large chunk of the work that their loan officers were doing, is that looking at these deals, figuring out which of these deals that they should lend to based on their credit policy, and then syncing it with their CRM. So once we did that, we saw how well that worked for them. And we think it could work well for other people in the industry as well. So we worked with them for a couple of months. We worked with other design partners as well. And then so we went out and then brought people in who've been in the mortgage industry for like 30 plus years, and then doing a bunch of user interviews. And so it's a combination of my AI background and my experience working with our initial lenders, and also having these industry experts on our team to make this happen.
Interesting way that you've just described that, Michael, because I think for a lot of us, if we think about a revolution in any kind of sphere of life, be it personal or professional or within a particular sector, we often think it comes from innovation. We often think it comes from that that blue sky idea that comes from nowhere. But actually, the way you're describing this is it's actually repurposing or reimagining something that already exists. Have I got that right?
Yeah. It's trying a bunch of things, something that already exists, applying it to many different markets, and then seeing which one sticks.
Yeah, so this whole idea of kind of really understanding the process and the system, because what you're, I guess, doing there is you're taking out any inefficiencies, any kind of humanness that either slows things down or that is almost imperfect, and actually adding in some learning within the AIs. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Michael, but this is kind of what I'm hearing from you here, and kind of correcting any sort of bits where that there are little flaws in the system, and then almost training it to spot those flaws and make better judgments and better decisions. Is that kind of where this is leading us, really?
In a way. So what we try to do is we try to empower the loan officers to make better credit decisions and to do it faster. So typically, a loan officer would look at a deal and then they would have to review hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents. Let's say you're reviewing 10 loans a day. By the ninth loan, you're pretty tired. You want to go home. It's like 5 p.m. And then you're looking at a bank statement with all of these different line items. And you're like, how can I make sense of this all? So, wouldn't it be great to, let's say, have an AI that would identify all of the items that you would need? Let's say, have there been any 3 large cash deposits in the last month? Something that would raise a red flag. Is their income statement equivalent to their bank statement? Right. So you have an AI point out all of those things. And AI doesn't yet make the final decision. It just enables the loan officer with all of the information that they would need to make the final decision.
So I'm kind of thinking how this would translate into, I guess, either other industries or other types of role. And it kind of sounds really very rules based. It's kind of almost that you kind of figure out within your human role, what are the rules? What are the parameters within which I'm playing? And can I apply those rules in a more efficient, more kind of functional, I guess, logical way, so that I can almost trust what the outcomes are? And then, as you say there, I can make the final decision. Is it the rules that are really important here?
Yes, 100%. You nailed it. So the reason why we're going after loans, residential loans, mortgage loans, is that there are policies and guidelines that have been refined for decades. So in the US, we have Fannie Mae, I think it's the Federal National Mortgage Association, something like that. And then we have Freddie Mac, all of these different loan associations. And then Congress and the government, they've made these regulations on what should lenders look for when they are giving loans to people. They have things like ECOA, which is like the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, things that you have to look for. So if you're applying for, let's say, a purchase loan, an FHA loan, something like that, you submit like 3 bank statements, you submit like 2 months of bank statement, things like that. You also submit like W-2s, which is like an earnings statement. And then all of these are guidelines and policies that have been developed for decades that are codified that these loan officers go through. So all these rules are things that you have to put into the AI. So there's very little uncertainty. And if you know AI emits uncertainty, hallucinations, and things like that. So you can actually have these rules within the application. And guess what? These rules don't change much over time. It takes years for them to change. So we can get to be in an industry where we innovate based on the present rules, and then we have a lot of time to refine the product before the rules change.
I'm loving this because it's that certainty, isn't it? I think, for a lot of us, we read in the media, or even if we try ourselves, and again, ChatGPT is the go-to for pretty much everybody, I think, on the planet right now, in terms of like trying and testing this stuff. So, because that is obviously an interface that most of us are now becoming very familiar with. But there is this kind of, yes, either hallucination of, the conversation or the outputs, but also this kind of, and I find it this drift. So it can be perfect in the first few times you're working with a particular thread. You think, oh, I've trained it, it's perfect. and then you get a slightly different tone or feel from an answer, or it goes slightly off track or completely off piste, and you think, hold on a minute, I'm going to have to retrain you. So this rules-based thing gives a certain level of, I guess, of confidence, but also within a regulated market like this, it gives that kind of credibility that it's okay to use this, because regulations are pretty serious things if you're going to fall foul of them.
Yeah, yeah. There's a website called All Ranks, like ALREGS, that dumps all of the lending regulations, all of the lending guidelines. And this is something that you're dumping on a human to know all of these regulations. And then lenders have developed something called a guidelines shield. So you do it over time for 20 years, you know all of the guidelines, and then someone comes to you with a loan scenario and you know exactly what guidelines apply to that scenario. What happens if someone is a new loan officer, they've only been in the business for a year, now they have to learn all of those lending guidelines. And then they go on ChatGPT and then ask a question, and ChatGPT gives them an answer, and then they don't know if it's correct or not. I mean, ChatGPT is great if you're already a domain expert in something, so you can spot when it's going off topic. But if you cannot, that's a very dangerous situation.
So there's so many little facets of this, aren't there, in terms of both for financial services, but again, for every single industry looking to explore their own version of what we're discussing here. And I think for me, it's just fascinating, that whole way of machine learning, where it is about being robust. It is about that diligence that has to happen to give you, as a human, the confidence of it. I find myself using the analogy all the time of being a lawyer and surrounding myself. I'm not a lawyer, but if I was a lawyer, surrounding myself with all these AI paralegals, as I call it. So they're doing the hard yards, they're producing the cases and doing all the preparation and the research. And then I, as the lawyer, have to have the confidence in them to then be able to kind of oversee the outputs and then take that into the courtroom. This is kind of an equivalent, isn't it, really, that as long as I can trust my AI that it's learned properly, it's giving me those, trustworthy and, regulated outputs, then I can make those bold decisions. But as you say, it's a tricky one if I'm not sure, because I don't have that level of experience. Maybe I haven't been there before to understand how to unpick those things. I mean, how much reliance can we put on machine learning right now? I mean, just how good is it for something like this?
Yeah. I like to say that even if our models are 99.99999% accurate, we should not put all of our reliance on it just because of the industry that we're operating. So 45% of the average American's net worth is in their home equity. I think I got that the other way around, or I think it's like the average American has the majority, 40% of Americans have the majority of their home equity in their net worth. So you're dealing with an asset class that most people, that's the largest asset that they own. So if you're dealing with 1 million loans a month, right? The one time you get it wrong, which would be 99.999%, it's still a bad thing. Like, you cannot afford to get it wrong. And because of the black box nature of neural networks, like, we don't really know what's going on under the hood in the models. So eventually, at some point, there's going to be a mistake. And that's why traditional software is always better, because you can, if something goes wrong, you know exactly where in the code something goes wrong. But with AI models, like, you cannot really point it out. You have to retrain the model over time. So I think the reliance would have to be pairing the AI model and then adding another verification layer on top of it with just plain code software logic, and then also bringing humans in the loop to it, humans that can actually vet these things. So contrary to popular opinion, like, even because I'm a CEO, I would be like, we should trust these things 100%, but for the asset class that we're operating in, I don't think we should ever give 100% of the trust to an AI model to manage the largest asset class for the majority of Americans.
There's a real kind of powerful statement there, Michael, and I really kind of applaud, but also thank you for the honesty there, because it, as you say, it would be so easy just to say, "Yep, here's the solution. Look at the stats. They show 90% efficiencies, and we can do incredible things, and the ROI is just going to sell itself, isn't it?" But there's almost a human honesty that needs to kind of come alongside this, because yeah, the numbers are going to just blow you away when you kind of do the calculations, but as you say, that practicality on the ground in the real world for one human being, it could be catastrophic for that individual, which makes that wrong then if you just almost blasely say, well, okay, it's fine, we still got our great return this month, we've done amazing revenues and we're happy. Because then, of course, you've got to sleep at night knowing that that person was, really, really badly affected by those decisions. And again, there's just something lovely about just being human and saying it's great, but actually we've still got to be really cautious that, we just don't have complete reliance on it. I love that approach. And do you think that kind of going forward, and I think this is probably a rhetorical, much bigger kind of question, but do you think it is this balance between human and AI that we need to kind of strike this really sort of, I guess, really honest relationship between the two? Because we could all get a little bit carried away by the hype, couldn't we, otherwise?
Yeah. And oh my God, there is a huge hype. I live in the heart of Silicon Valley, and you can start a new company, put AI to its name, and if you have a decent background, you could raise a bunch of money just with the hype of AI replacing a bunch of manual work. Um, I think for some industries, we might get there to a point where, let's say, you could have an AI do 100% of the automation for particular things. Let's say you have someone on your team who is writing blog posts all the time, or taking appointments, or like scheduling appointments for restaurants, or like taking calls to like get bookings. That is pretty low stakes. So you can have, there's going to be a time when you won't have like appointment schedulers anymore. Like AI would just handle all of that. So the human AI synergy there, I don't see it. But for some of the cases, some of the applications where you need humans to verify, I do see some human AI synergy there. And another thing that I see that a lot of people are not in agreement with is, a lot of people think that there's going to be one God model, like omnipresent AGI. I'm of the belief that we will have very small specialized models in different kinds of situations. So you would have, let's say, a model for mortgage loans, a model for streaming that would just analyze the conversation of the stream, like we're recording here, and then gives you particular points that you would need to maybe clip for social media. That's already happening. But what we'll see is we'll have millions of models that would perform specific things. And how we should think about it is just as how we have apps right now. Humans use apps. And then when apps came, it wasn't like apps are going to replace humans, right? It's like humans are going to use the apps. That's the exact same way we should think about AI models, is we're going to have millions of AI models and humans are going to use it. There are some models that are going to operate autonomously, but there are going to be a ton more models that need to be operated by the human. And I think that's where we would get to.
And do you think that that's probably within a regulated marketplace, financial services, and obviously there are many others, telecoms, pharmaceuticals, etc., these kind of more sensitive or sort of potentially higher risk, like you say, higher risk markets? Do you think that's where we're going to see this really playing out? Because it almost feels like the way you're describing it is almost they need to be the leading kind of sectors, and then the rest of us will kind of watch and see what happens there in those sensitive markets, and then we'll kind of do our thing behind it. Do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think it's too early to regulate AI for even financial services. I think what we need is some sort of a sandbox. And I'm going to say this, it's a sandbox that involves limited privileges, but a get out of jail free card for people experimenting. Because I've seen a lot of regulation. So California just had this, I think it's SB 7 something that got vetoed by the California governor. And it was this AI safety bill that would introduce a lot of guardrails to how you build AI models and how you do reporting and then watermarking. All of that is great stuff. I think we should have all of that. Now, the problem is the technology is evolving faster than the regulation can evolve. So most of the references in the bill would be references to, let's say, AI models passing the bar exam or AI models doing things. That 6 months from now, those would be capabilities that the models can do 10 times that, but those capabilities are not yet in the regulation. So all technology eventually gets to a point where it asymptotes to a point of, I would say, standard advancements. Like performance gets faster. But let's look at the iPhone. Like we've had a bunch of iPhones over time, but the difference between iPhone 13 and the iPhone 12, it's much smaller than the difference between an iPhone 10 and iPhone 5. So we're sort of like asymptoting on how much better they get and what they can do, but like we're getting much more performance. And now if we're going to regulate iPhones, now is the perfect time to slam regulations on iPhones. Is like they can't get any much better than the regulations can get. But with AI, the difference between GPT 3.5 and GPT 4 is so vast, and then GPT 4 and GPT 4.0. If we regulated GPT 3.5 in 2022, we would not have GPT 4.0 now, just 2 years later. So I think, to your point about regulation, financial services and all of those, yes, they need to set the standard for regulation, but it's a little too early to slam a bunch of regulation. What we need to do is have sort of like a sandbox environment where we can say, hey, these are test regulations that we could potentially try. And if you violate these regulations, I mean, we can slam a fine on you or do something, but this is not the rule of law because the models will get better.
So one of the big sensitivities, I guess, sort of in the market, particularly that Addy is playing in here, is obviously data security and privacy. This is always one of the big pushbacks, isn't it, from that kind of progress where you say it's sandbox, it's kind of like, let's be innovative, let's push the boundaries here. And then, of course, you get a section of the community saying, well, data security, privacy, no, I wouldn't want my data being used in that kind of environment there. How are you playing with that? Because that must rear its head every single day for you.
Yeah. So I think data security should be separated from regulation. I think data security is something that should be built in the model from the start. I think you can build smarter models that are secure. And you don't, the lack of security is not a prerequisite to model advancements. So one of the things you could do that we do is we run a lot of evaluations on the performance of the model. So evaluations are like test cases, testing of responses. And then what we do again is we try to silo the data that gets passed onto the model. So we create like separate copies of the same model for different financial institutions. So if you are, let's say, Neil Capital, and then you have another company called Michael's Capital. So Michael's Capital's model is different from Neil Capital's model. So that way, there is no intercommunication, like the data stays private. And this was like a lot of the work that I did at AWS was I worked on a data sovereignty platform for AWS. So for different data centers, you want to make sure that you don't like transfer data between different data centers. And when you do regionalization, the data stays in the region that it's supposed to stay. And in some countries like Switzerland, they're very, very strict with making sure that all Swiss citizens' data housed in data centers in the EU and things like that. So I don't think data security is the lack of data security is a prerequisite to having model advancements. And it's very easy to add security to models and still have better models.
So maybe I think for a lot of us, we're either being sort of slightly misled here, or we're kind of misconstruing the reality. As you say, some of these things shouldn't really be limiters on our thinking and on our planning and what's possible. And maybe we're kind of self-limiting here if we're to sort of believe, that it shouldn't be a restriction, because the technologies and the learning models are able to almost sense that these are challenges and sensitivities and kind of deal with them under the hood. And you sort of talk about this kind of black box approach, and kind of it's very much, it's almost like we don't need to worry about that sort of thing that's happening in the background. It is very much about the outputs and the reliability that is obviously key. So how do you feel then that and how are things going to change from I guess from a customer perspective? Because, this isn't going to be all about the lender, is it, solely? I mean, obviously, there's going to be a lot happening there. They're going to be leading these processes, but this is going to kind of, I guess, spill out over into the investor market in terms of strategies, how you maybe even think about your own portfolio if you're looking to build a retirement fund or whatever it is. I mean, obviously, there are many, many different user cases here, but how's AI going to be impacting on this kind of broader landscape?
Yeah. Honestly, when I started the company 18 odd months ago, when I went full time in May 2023, and even I started writing the first line of code in December 22, I would have thought that it would have seeped into the broader consumer market by now in 2 years. I haven't seen that happen. And I don't know why, because I mean, like ChatGPT came out 2 years ago, and even now, it's an incredibly niche thing that only um, forward-thinking folks use for AI. Like my mom doesn't use ChatGPT. A lot of people that I know use ChatGPT for very limited use cases, and it's the most used AI product now. And I'll answer your question in a bit, but when the iPhone came out, it was a huge line of people wanting to get the iPhone. And for 2009, so if we compare ChatGPT now to 2009, 2 years after the iPhone came out, I would think that we would have a lot more mainstream adoption to the iPhone than we do have for ChatGPT now. It's like, why hasn't ChatGPT or other kinds of AI models, why haven't they gone to the broader consumer market? I mean, they do great with having like spam calls. Like almost all the spam calls I get now are from like an AI robot. And I think the technology is just not ready for consumer adoption. I'll tell you why. That's why we target enterprises. Because if you're within a company, you can get to put guardrails. You can get to see how it works. So, in particular for lending, when you're submitting an application for a home loan, you fill out something called a 1003 form. In the optimal form, I would not want a human to submit a 1003 form. I would just ask them questions about their home buying process and then fill out the form for them as they're answering those questions instead of them manually entering fields into a PDF or like writing it down. But the reason why people use PDFs is because it just works. And if you ask someone a bunch of questions and then hope to fill the form for them, and it doesn't work all the time, and there's a clear limitation for something to be adopted, it has to work. And if you're an enterprise company, you can deal with a couple of cases that it doesn't work because it provides a lot of efficiencies. So I do see it, to answer your question, getting into the consumer market, getting into investments, getting into other kinds of financial services. But I'm afraid that the technology is at least a couple of years out from having like mass adoption. I think we're really still early. And it looks like AI is modeling itself after the internet more so than after mobile. I think after 2 years after the internet came out, it was still a very niche thing that only a couple people used. I was talking to my friend who grew up in the UK, and she was like, they didn't have internet in the house until like 2005 or so. And I'm like, okay, but that was like 10 plus years after, the internet. That was like, what, 8 years after Google, but it was still a very slow adoption. So I think AI is modeling itself after the internet more so than after mobile.
It's interesting. Yeah, just really interesting to hear your kind of, I guess, take on that, and storytelling from somebody who's obviously very, very close to this, and how this is kind of emerging as an opportunity. I noticed actually on my version of ChatGPT this morning here, I've now got a little button which is search the web, which wasn't there last week. It wasn't there on Friday. I haven't checked over the weekend, and this morning it's like, hold on, next to the little paperclip, there's now a search the web thing on my prompt. It's like, oh, now that was just a game changer. So goodbye, Google. Hello, ChatGPT for search. I've been using it in that way, but Perplexity as well. Do you feel then that this is going to be, it's almost an evolution to a tipping point then? Because I just can't imagine that somebody who is very, very savvy with their investments, and maybe they're not necessarily relying on a broker or an agent to kind of manage their funds, and they're looking to kind of almost have this sort of symbiotic relationship with AI to help kind of guide some of the investment decisions, and then they go to the professional to kind of implement it. I just can't imagine that they're not going to be using this in search and in doing their background kind of studies about where the latest opportunities are for long-term or short-term investments. I just think it's just becoming so powerful for those who are already realizing they can be in the game. And it's just such an easy access now, isn't it? It's just really interesting to hear your take that actually for the vast majority, it is going to be the usual product adoption curve where, the mass are going to take a long time to pick this up. Are we talking months or are we talking years, do you think?
It's hard to say. It's definitely not months. It could be years. And as I'm thinking about it, I'm trying to think what would make it months and what would make it years. And the first thing I think of is developers. It's probably not a lot of AI native developers. To find an AI engineer, the conversations that I have with AI engineers in Silicon Valley versus AI engineers, even in New York, are vastly different. And there are only a couple thousand people who I would say are very strong AI researchers. So I think it's a talent thing of having a bunch of AI researchers, like the technology to, let's say, build a model or build something like a Perplexity. It requires a different set of skill sets to, let's say, people who've been like engineers versus just building an app. I think one of the reasons why the App Store was able to succeed so quickly is because to build for the App Store, you needed something called Objective C, and the C programming language had been around for a really, really long time. And it's like superset of C, and then you can build, like, people made like the React Native, which is like a framework for building apps, came up along later, and it was JavaScript and had been along for like since 1995. And but there was talent. That's my my big takeaway. But for AI, it's not a huge volume of AI talent, and I think that's the number one limiting factor for AI adoption right now. And I wish that every software developer right now would just put learning AI not on a surface level, but on a really deep level in their roadmap. and just start building AI applications.
So everybody listening to this, if you know somebody who is a developer, you've heard from Michael. There's an invitation from Silicon Valley here. Please step up to the plate because you're missing an opportunity. That's a really interesting take. I've not heard, Michael, anybody else actually say it in that way before. So, I thank you for kind of opening that little window there, because it is different. I think a lot of us just assume that these things miraculously just manifest for us, as users of these technologies and platforms, and almost forget that there are the humans behind these things actually creating and reimagining and rethinking. And as you say, there is just this kind of finite pool of talent there. Well, it's an infinite pool, but the ones who are actually now becoming qualified to be able to make a difference. That's a really interesting take. And I guess in some ways could come as a bit of a relief to many of us who think, we need to kind of be chasing and playing catch up with this thing that's running away from us. But actually the reality is, as long as you're kind of in the game and you're playing and you're watching and you're listening and you're, as you said there, and that's a really interesting one, learning, because there is no playbook, and we have to remind ourselves, there's no playbook here that tells you how to do this, because humanity has not been here before. And I think as long as we keep remembering that, there's almost a nice kind of sense of, it's okay, just pause, take a breath. You're not going to get lost here. Even if you're thinking about this stuff, you're still probably ahead of the vast majority, professionally and personally. And there's quite some kind of comfort there, isn't there? Because there is this danger that we get lost in the hype, isn't there?
Yeah, yeah. It's still very early. We're in the earliest days of this technology, and it's going to take a really, really long time for us to see mass adoption um, that would be economically changing. Or I think even the internet, did it change how fundamental industries worked before? We don't have, when the internet came, like we got rid of some rules. But technology, if you look at GDP, it's only like, I think, less than 20%, a little bit over 20%. Like, and you would think like technology would like replace like a bunch of different sectors of GDP, but it's still a minority in that. And I think with the hype, there has to be realism in the fact that there are still other huge industries like energy and CPG and commodities, like things that people use all the time. And although technology is really big, but it's not as big as other industries. And as technologists, like, we can get blinded in the fact that, hey, we're doing something that is revolutionary, but it's not revolutionary to the point where it's replacing a large sector of the GDP. Eventually, maybe in 100 years from now, it would. And I think, again, that's the other thing, right? Because we're like, things have moved so quickly in like 20, 30 years. And then we forgot that things like, steel and the railway industry, they were around for 150 plus years. Like, so we're still really early in how technology unfolds. So yeah, to your point, there's comfort in that.
Yeah, I love that sort of voice of reason, Michael, that, you're just, because it would be so easy for you as well, personally, wouldn't it, to just get carried away by this and over enthused by it, because you see the opportunity. I know you see the opportunity, and you're sharing, lots of great kind of wisdom here. But, just to keep your feet on the ground is so important in this, isn't it? But with that in mind, what's coming next? Obviously, you're seeing, through Addy and other work that you're doing, you're seeing these amazing kind of returns within, say, lending. For financial services, what's next? Do you see the next kind of big thing coming? You might not be able to share that with us because it might be commercially sensitive for you, but I think, can you give us a kind of a sign or an indication of what to look out for?
Yeah, I can give you a couple of things, not only for commercial lending, but I can give you a couple of things with things that are happening generally with AI, also with financial services. I can also talk about some things that I think would change a lot in the coming years. And I will say to your previous point about uh, being grounded in truth. When I'm talking to your investors, it's a totally different conversation. I'm having like that revolutionary, visionary, like this is going to change the world. Give me your money, sort of thing. And then when I'm, and that's why they give us their money, because we can be able to build things in reason and then make a lot of returns now. Because if we're delusional, then we can't build things that people want and need right now. We're going to build things that people would, let's say, want in the future. And that future is like 20, 30, 40 years away. So to your point, because we're having this conversation with people who are not going to write me a check, I'm going to be real to them. And for some of the things that I see next, I'll start with a good model for thinking about what's to come next. Government is a large part of the world. Like, if we think of innovation, we have to think about, well, what's the government regulating and what's the government not regulating? And then semiconductors, I think, would be huge. I think there's a semiconductor race right now with Taiwan, China, the US. Like, there's TSMC just approved like a huge Arizona plant. So that's going to be huge. And then the CHIPS Act. So that would come. I see regulation with, let's say, the US immigration system. A bunch of people are flowing into the US with and then all those people need jobs. They need a way to work. Like, those things would be regulated. And right now, the regulatory framework, there's a finite number of people that are allowed on a labor visa. That number is going to go higher. And it just takes one regulation for the government to say, hey, from now on, we're going to give 1 million visas a year instead of 100,000. And that opens 10x the opportunity for finding people jobs. So that's another thing to look at for. And then on the core AI side, I think I'll talk about financial services last, but on the core AI side, what I think that I'm seeing is having just-in-time user interfaces being generated. I have seen some demos of, like, we're on StreamYard, we're streaming this stuff, and there are two boxes of screens. There's your video, there's my video. And that's because the developer has actually coded that user interface. There's going to be two two videos, and then coded the boxes and everything. Now, what would happen, I'm thinking like 2-3 years from now, is that you would prompt the computer that, hey, I'm going to build a video streaming software. I don't know how many people would be in the call, but you just figure it out as people are joining the call. Just generate the UI as it's going. And so there are so many things right now when it comes to like analyzing charts and graphs. We just rely on bar charts. We just rely on pie charts, like different kinds of things. Like, but we needed to have a just-in-time user interface that generates. And because chatbots are limited and just generate text, I think having the UI be generated according to the data source, that would be a huge opportunity. And I think someone's going to build it. And for financial services, I'll go back to regulation and say we've seen the recent NARs, like the National Association of Realtors in the US. There was a settlement on who pays what percentage, whether it's like the seller's agent, buyer's agent, for buying real estate. And that also would bring huge opportunities in the market for financial services. I also do see a lot of prediction markets coming. It's huge now. People are betting on like events, and I think we have like an innate gambling nature as humans. So I do see that coming next. I want to give a very thoughtful answer to what would AI change in financial services, and I have something, but I'm going to give a very generic thing. So that way, maybe I'll go ahead and work on this as my second company after this. But a very generic thing is, instead of building AI for financial services companies, build a financial service company that utilizes AI. And because you're building it, you can get to build a lot more AI with very little adoption risk. Because I sell to financial services companies, they're very slow to adopt. And I'm like, when I'm talking to, let's say, the CEO of a mortgage bank, I'm like, oh my God, hey man, like if I could just build a bank that is the most efficient AI forward bank in the world, like you don't see the opportunity here. Like this could be huge. So it's like instead of building, let's say, a financial service thing that a bank uses, so just go build a bank and just do the AI thing in there because they're just slow to adopt. So I think there's some opportunity there, and I think eventually folks will work on it. I'm sorry that wasn't very.
It was no, it's golden. Honestly, that is golden, Michael, because I think, for a lot of people listening to that, they'll think, okay, well, I'm not directly in financial services, but
Yeah.
I know my industry well. And actually, I know where the pain points are. I know where the challenges are. I could actually build an AI business around that particular set of needs. So I don't need to retrofit. I can actually build something new.
Yeah.
That
Don't
is the
be a
moment,
vendor.
I think, Michael. That's the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. I want to put Addy into people's hands and let people find out a little bit more about your work and the amazing sort of progress that you're making here. How do people find you?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if you type in Michael Vandi, I'm the first link that comes up on LinkedIn. And then if you go on our website, addy.so, and book a demo, I'm 100% going to be the person on the call because I do all the sales calls.
Wow. So you can tap into Michael's wisdom, intelligence, and amazing kind of thought leadership. No, seriously, Michael, I mean, this has just been such a great conversation because you've given me sort of 2 or 3 ideas of things that, I'm not personally in financial services, but I can see the crossover into my world. And even at a little micro level, which is how I operate, I can just see there's things in here for me too. So, I thank you on behalf of everyone in the audience here, because I know people are going away thinking, that's now made me think. And this, of course, is just the beauty of a podcast. So, Michael, thank you again.
Thank you, Neil. Appreciate it.